Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyau Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragnish Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapashantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we begin today on verse number 69. We're almost at the end of the introductory part of the book. Just to refresh your memory, since we are meeting after more than a month, we saw that in the first part of this book that we are studying together, the book begins by drawing our attention to the importance of the study, the importance of making the best use of the opportunities that have become available to us. In life, we see that many opportunities come to us. We are not always able to make the best use of every opportunity, and there are several missed opportunities also. Sometimes when we miss an opportunity, perhaps after a few days or a month or a years, we might get another chance. But there are certain things in life which we cannot afford to miss. And attaining enlightenment is one such thing. Early on in the book, almost in the beginning, we are told that there are three things that come only through God's grace. In Sanskrit, Manushyatvam, Mumukshutvam, Mahapurusha Samshrayaha. A human birth, that is Manushyatvam. A desire to become free or attain spiritual freedom, the desire to lead a spiritual life, that is mumukshutvam, that longing for a higher ideal, the longing for God or longing for freedom, spiritual freedom. And third, Mahapurusha Samshrayaha, the opportunity to learn under the guidance of an enlightened being. Now, all of these three things come through God's grace. And if we are lucky to have received this in this birth, then we cannot afford to miss this chance. Because if we don't become enlightened, then we have to be born again. If we are born again, there is no guarantee that we'll get a human birth. There are hundreds and millions of species. We could be born in any of those species. By chance, if we do get a human birth, there is no guarantee that in that birth we'll have the same longing for God, the same longing for spiritual life as we are having now. Because we don't know what kind of karma will bring upon that birth. So it may be possible to be born as a human being, but not have any interest in spiritual life, as we do indeed see, even among the people we know, they have a human birth, but there is no particular inclination to know or to lead a spiritual life. Now, it's possible that one may have both a human birth and an inclination to lead a higher life, but perhaps there may not be an opportunity to learn from a spiritual being. So, for all of these three rare things to come together is even more rare. And if that opportunity has come to us in this life, we just cannot afford to miss it, because if this is missed, we don't know how many trillions or gazillion lives we may have to go through again for this combination to come back. So after pointing out the importance of not delaying our quest for enlightenment, the book goes on to show the importance of knowledge, that ultimately what matters is the experience, the transcendent experience in the heart. All other things become valuable, become meaningful, become significant only when the primary purpose is to experience that highest truth. So whether it is going on a pilgrimage, going to temples, praying, worshipping, doing selfless service, all of these activities are helpful, meaningful, but only if we see them as instrument that will give me this experience in my heart. Because without that experience, it's just activities, that's all, which might lead to good results. If there are good activities, then they will lead to good results, but not necessarily to enlightenment. So the main purpose of transcendence should never be forgotten. And then in the book, the teacher and the student are brought together, and the rest of the book is a dialogue between the teacher and the student. We see also a considerable section in that first part devoted to the experience of the student, how the student is feeling that longing to get out of this mess of the world. Now, even superficially, if we look at the world, it does look quite messy anyway. But if you look at it even more deeply, we will see that this chaos and the mess is not merely on the surface. It's not just about corruption. It's not just about exploitation. All these are very real problems which exist in the world. But the root of these problems is further down, and that root, the primary cause of this problem is our misperception. There's something wrong here. Only when there is something wrong here, I'm able to see something wrong which is outside. That primary cause of the problem is really in our own heart. And that's what the student begins to experience, and then seeks the help of the teacher. And then the student asked several questions, or 7 in particular, 7 questions. I think it is in verse 49 of the book. And then as we come towards the end of this first section, the teacher answers one of those 7 questions. And that question was, how is freedom attained? If I'm experiencing this deep bondage now, I want to know how I can be free. And that is the answer teacher gives in these 2 verses, 69 and 70. So let me read those verses. Mokshasya hetuhu prathamo nigadyate vairagyam anitya vastushu tatak shamaschapi damastitiksha nyasaf prasakta khila karmanam bhrisham. Verse 70. Tatashrutistan mananam satatvam dhyanam chiram nitya nirantaram munehe tato vikalpam parametya vidvan ihaiva nirvana sukham samruchati. I'll first describe what leads to freedom. Supreme detachment from all perishable objects, followed by control of the mind and the senses, forbearance, and the immediate giving up of all activities to which one is attached. This is followed by hearing of the Vedic truths, reflecting on them, and regular and continuous meditation by the seeker. It is then that the wise person experiences the joy of freedom here itself, having reached the supreme which is beyond all duality. You will see that this is a very succinct summary of the 4 primary disciplines mentioned in the early part of the book, what are called a sadhana chatushtaya. He says supreme detachment from all perishable objects. Atyantam vairagyam. Raga is attachment. Viraga is non-attachment or detachment. Atyantam means supreme. It's not enough to have kind of a mild detachment. Well, it's better than not having detachment, but what is needed for that ultimate realization is detachment of the highest degree. Now, those of us who have undertaken a study of this book, we already have some detachment. Because if that detachment were not there, we wouldn't even have felt like reading this book. We wouldn't even have felt like spending some time trying to understand what the book is saying. So because we feel this is important enough, there's already some detachment in the heart. Now what we need is to find a way to intensify that detachment. And that intensification can come only through viveka, looking deeply. The more we look deeply into every experience in life, everything that we see, every thought that comes to us, and kind of set up an auto mechanism inside that filters out everything that we take in from the world and says, I'm only going to allow those things inside my body-mind system which are positive, which are healthy, which will take me nearer to my goal. And I'm going to keep out all those things which will divert me, which will distract me, which will take me away from my ideal. Today we are already aware of such a filtering system. In fact, every computer has it. If you are connected to the internet, it's like you have opened one door to the world. And we have no idea what the world is going to send to us. And so we create a filter that I will only allow those things which are virus-free. Of course, in the times in which we live, there's another filter. Most of us, we use a mask when we go out. The purpose of the mask is this: we need air to breathe, but we don't want the virus. So we put a filter by which we'll get the air, but hopefully not the virus. Exactly the same way, we should find a way to create an automatic filter around us by which we will allow ourselves to only allow things that are good for me. Now, in order to make that determination of what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is not good for me, we need discernment, we need viveka. And having discerned what is right and what is wrong, I need that detachment from what is wrong and saying, I'm going to keep that out. Because sometimes, even when we know things are not good, if we don't have the detachment, we will not be able to keep it out. For instance, most of us who are health conscious are aware that junk food is not good for us. So there is knowledge of what is good and what is not good, what is healthy and what is not healthy. But if there is no detachment, that in spite of knowing that junk food is not good, I will still go ahead and just eat it. So, I need discernment, but I also need detachment then to allow only the good things to come in. That's why he says supreme detachment. And with that, detachment becomes possible only when there is control of the mind and the senses. That's the next thing that is mentioned here. Control of the mind and the senses. Because both, actually they feed into each other. If I'm able to control my mind and senses, I'll be able to practice detachment well. If I have a strong detachment, then control of the mind and the senses will become easier. So they are mutually dependent on one another. Forbearance. This is absolutely necessary, because no matter how much we try to wall off ourselves, there are going to be circumstances in life that we have no control over. And in such circumstances, we just have to forbear. Without grumbling, without getting upset, without condemning, without blaming, just bear it. That increases our inner strength. That prevents us from getting distracted from our main purpose in life. And then, the immediate giving up of all activities to which one is attached. Now, what it means is, what does it mean, giving up all activities? Do we just sit in a corner and do nothing? No. What is meant here is giving up all activities which are desire propelled. Desire propelled in the sense which have some self-interest involved. And that's what is, the Karma Yoga will help us do that. That everything that we do in life, if we see that the activity includes in some form the presence of our spiritual ideal, includes in some form the presence of God, then it won't be just my own personal self-interest that is propelling me to any activity. Because if it's only a question of my self-interest without any higher ideal powering that activity, then I'm attached to it. And attachment will lead, as the later verses will show, to ultimately sorrow and suffering. And not just that, I have to just forget about then becoming free. Because the more I get attached, the more bound I get. So more of bondage. And only when I have all of these things, supreme detachment, control of the mind and the senses, and giving up all selfishly propelled activities, only then we are able to do these three primary practices in Vedanta. That's what mentioned in verse 70. Hearing of the Vedic truths, hearing of the principles, then reflecting on them, and then regularly meditating on them. We have seen this, and we will see it more detail going forward as well. So with these things, a wise person experiences the joy of freedom here itself. This is most important also. That this freedom is not a post-mortem existence. It's not that something it will happen after death. Going to heaven will happen after death. But attaining spiritual freedom, moksha, can occur right here, right now. That supreme which is beyond all duality. So this brings us to the end of the first section of the book. And then we move on now to the second section, which is titled Me and That. So let me read to you the note that is given at the beginning of the section. You have your copies of the book with you. You can take a look at that. All that exists can be described in three simple words: this, that, and me. In the Sanskrit is idam, is this, that is tat, and me is aham. By this, that is idam, is meant the world, everything that is perceived by my senses or imagined by my mind. That, or tat, is the reality, the truth or the being which my mind can imagine as transcending all of this. These are very important terms because the rest of the book is primarily about these three things: this, that, and me. So pay careful attention. And me is the individual, every one of us. Me, who is doing all the perceiving and the imagining. So this is all this world that I experience, everything that my senses can see. That means everything that is transcending all of my present perceptions, and aham, or me. Now, when I apply viveka, the power of discernment, and look deeply at this, that is the world around me, I notice that it changes all the time. The world that I see when I am awake is quite different from the world that I see while I am dreaming. And the world disappears altogether when I am in deep sleep. Looking deeply, it is possible to see that the world seems to have no absolute existence and is totally dependent on my perception of it. So here actually a very important axiom of Vedanta has been mentioned. In Sanskrit, it is called Ajnata Satta. Ajnata Satta means, do things exist when I am not aware of them? That's a big subject, but at present our thinking goes this way, that when I go to sleep, I'm not aware of the world, but the world is still there, out there. I'm asleep, but the world is out there, because when I wake up, I find it is there. And so I can assume that the world was there before I went to sleep. The world is there after I woke up. And it seems to be the same world. So the world was existing even when I was not aware of it. And to bolster this argument, I can say, well, there were other people in my house, among my friends, who were awake. And they can testify that the world did exist even when I was asleep. The other argument is that things exist only when I am aware of them. If I have to depend on a testimony of other people to prove the existence of something, then we are in deep trouble, because the first way of thinking leads to the conclusion that the dream that I had last night, and when I woke up, I'm no longer aware of that dream world. Of course, I've woken up aware of this world. I'm not aware of the dream world. So do I have to then believe that the dream world that I saw is still continuing to exist, although I am not aware of it? If I'm willing to grant that, then this first argument we could say is logical, because I believe that, I believe this. But most of us believe that this world exists even when I'm not aware of it, but the dreams, they last only as long as I'm seeing them. So there's already, you can see that we are not consistent in our way of thinking. Similarly, look at the next para. When I apply the power of discernment and look deeply at the individual me, I can see what is intrinsic to me and what is not. So what is inseparable? Intrinsic to me is inseparable from my existence, and that is the Atman. So everything else about me that is separable from me, that can be separated from me, is not me. So think about it. When we lose any of our limbs, I'm still there. sometimes in some accidents or in wars, terrible injuries can occur and people lose the use of limbs. But still, the person still can survive. So whatever can be separated from me may be important, may be helpful, but it's still not me. I am only what I am. In other words, what cannot be taken away from me is me. Whatever can be taken away from me is not me. Just put it simply. And finally, when you apply that same power of discernment to tat, that, there also we apply the same principle. How even God, or Ishvara in Sanskrit, we can see what is intrinsic to the divine and what is not intrinsic. If we are in the habit of thinking about God in a specific form, we have to ask, is that form of the divine intrinsic? If my body is changeable, well, it changes. I weighed only a few pounds when I was born. Now I weigh much more. So the body has been changing. The mind has been changing. So the changing parts of my personality are not me, because I, the Atman, is unchangeable. But we read in the stories of gods and goddesses also. There are stories about when little Krishna, or little Shiva, or little Hanuman, and they grow up. So their bodies have changed with age. So is the body, if we are in the habit of thinking of the divine in some form, is that form intrinsic to the divine? Or what is intrinsic is the being who is inside that form, who is inside those qualities. So that is what looking deeply means. Looking deeply and trying to find out what is real, what is unchanging, and what is changing all the time. So when we apply discernment, apply viveka to these three things, this, the world, that, the Supreme Being, and aham, me, what do we see? Superficially, we know what we see. But looking deeply, do we see anything different? That is the question. So, let's read verse 71. Yad bodhavyam tavedanim atmanatma vivechanam taduchyate maya samyak Shrutva Atmani Avadharaya. I'll now teach you what you need to learn. Discernment between the self and the non-self. Listen carefully and ponder this in your mind. Now this is very important. The discernment of separating the self from the non-self. Think about it this way. The self, the Atman, is covered by non-Atman elements. The self is covered by the non-self. Now, if the covering was clearly distinguishable from the Atman, then separating that would be very easy. It would be very simple. But the problem now here is that the covering is almost indistinguishable from that which is inside. When you get a packet from Amazon, you know exactly this is the packet, you open the box or open the packet and the thing you have ordered is inside. But what if, now this is a very crazy idea, what if you had ordered a box from Amazon and they wrapped it up Well, they have to wrap up. They wrapped it up in another box which looks exactly like the box you had ordered. Then you are in deep trouble. You don't know. And maybe they have just put it in several boxes, all looking identical. So you just open the first box and then you find something. Say, oh, is this the one I ordered? And so that's where looking deeply. I know this is not something we do, but just to kind of give you an idea about the problem of the covering being indistinguishable from what is inside. The covering is almost like a chameleon. Sri Ramakrishna gives that example of chameleon, how it changes its color. And we know that from our own experience as well. So these coverings are like the chameleon. They change their color and they kind of take the color of the self. Now, don't take the word color literally. So they appear in such a way, they appear as if they are the self. That's the idea. But no matter how much they may try to appear as the self, they cannot do it perfectly because the self, the Atman, is pure consciousness. And the covering with just material things. Very subtle matter, but still matter. Now, consciousness and matter are really polar opposites. There is no similarity between them at all. The books often compare them to just difference between light and darkness. Just as light and darkness can't be together, can't be at the same time. If one comes, the other has to leave. So if there is consciousness, then matter has no place there. And if there is matter, then consciousness has no place there. But here somehow, although they are so different in every way, matter is perishable, consciousness is imperishable, and so on. Matter is under laws, consciousness is beyond laws. But nevertheless, in spite of that, these entirely, totally dissimilar things have somehow become indistinguishable. And this very mysterious, impossible has seemingly become possible. And this phenomenon of something that is impossible appearing possible is called Maya. That's a term also that will come often in this book. There is a phrase that is often used in Sanskrit, aghatana ghatana patiyasi maya. Maya is something which can make it appear that something that has never happened has happened. Again, I'm going to go very frequently to the example of the dream because it helps us so much to understand what's going on. Think about the dream. Last night in my dream, I went to Australia. Apparently, I was still lying in my bed here, but I was in Australia. Is it possible to be lying in your own bed in a different country and then find yourself suddenly, much faster than any flight can take you, suddenly in Australia? Impossible. And yet, it became possible. And it became possible because I slept and I dreamt. And sleeping means I'm forgetting myself. And because I'm forgetting myself, I'm able to project something that doesn't exist, but makes me feel as if it is existing. So Maya is like that. Maya is what makes me forget my true self. Maya is what makes me forget I am divine. And once I fall asleep and forget I am divine, what Maya projects in the place of the divine is a human being. So my present human identity is what I'm experiencing in the dream I am having. Once I wake up, I will know that I'm divine. I don't have to become divine, I'm already divine right now. I don't have to become free, I'm already free right now. I don't have to become immortal. I'm already immortal right now. But because I'm dreaming, because I don't know, I'm worried about birth and death and sickness and virus, all of these things. You see, it's good that most of us have taken vaccines, most of us have received boosters, and they are very helpful to keep the virus away. If you want to get rid of the virus once and for all, just wake up. Once you wake up and find you are the immortal, infinite Atman, no virus can come there. A simple way, a quick way to do that. Okay, so let me see. Let me look at this one verse, and I'll just say a few words about this verse, and then we will have questions. He said, discernment between the self and the non-self, verse 71. Listen carefully and ponder this in your mind. Now, this is important. Why does the teacher say, Samyak avadharaya, listen carefully? Avadharana also means hold it. It's not just about listening. When we listen to lectures or classes, the important question is, how much is my mind able to hold? Dharana, ava plus dharana means holding. So, at the end of reading a book or listening to a lecture, it's good to kind of just sit quietly for a few minutes and see, what am I holding? What is my mind holding? Oftentimes you might notice that a few ideas, a few thoughts may have been retained, but a lot of it goes away. Fortunately today, everything is getting recorded. We can go back, listen to it again, and so on. And there are books for us to reflect on. So we have opportunities to go back and try to see and hold on to the portions we may have missed earlier. That's what the teacher says, listen carefully, because separating out the self from the non-self is a very it's a task that needs full attention. Just like when there are now some of the war-torn areas in Syria and earlier on in many parts of Iraq and even Afghanistan, people are not free to move in every area freely. Partly because the long wars that these places have had, there have been a lot of mines that have been planted. And walking through an area which is filled with these landmines, you have to be extremely careful. One wrong step could be devastating, could be dangerous. That's what can happen in this study as well. While we may not lose a limb, but if we are not careful, then how easy it is to get kind of sucked back into this world of perishable things. And so we have to move very carefully, with full attention, with full awareness, with full intention. And that is, the teacher says, listen carefully and ponder this in your mind. So how to listen and how to hold those ideas is a part of spiritual practice as well. And now, going forward, the teacher will begin to answer another question that the student has asked in that verse 49 earlier, and that is, what is this non-self? What is this anatma? Because if I have to separate the self and the non-self, the self has been described, but now I don't know what non-self is. So once I know what the covering is, then I can try to separate it out. So the section that we will be studying going forward will be a description of this covering. Because once we know what the covering is, it will become easier then to know how to get it out. So we will stop here now and we'll take a look at the questions. Okay. Can our physical senses help us look deeply, or do we need to rely on our mind, intellect, heart to see the self? To see the self cannot be seen by the senses or the mind and the intellect, because the self is beyond all of them. So what we are really seeing, if my senses can see it, if my mind can think about it, it's already the non-self. So I can use my senses and the mind to look at things, determine what their characteristics are, and then say, this is not the self. That is why the process is called neti neti, not this, not this. So once I'm able to negate everything that is perishable, everything that doesn't answer the description of the self or the description of God that we read about or hear about or study about, then we can say, this is not what I'm looking for. This is not what I'm looking for. So the seeing part by the senses is of things that are not the self. Having said that, then the question would be, how do I experience the self then? Because the senses and the mind cannot take me there. So there are these two statements in the Upanishads which look apparently mutually contradictory. On one side we read, avang manasagocharam. It's beyond the reach of the speech, of mind and the senses. And then in another Upanishad we read, manasaivedam aptavyam, manasa eva idam aptavyam. This can be reached, this can be attained only with the help of the mind. So how do we put these two statements together? And in his commentary, Shankaracharya explains that susamskritena manasa, that mind which has been refined, which has been purified, that mind will reveal the self. You might remember the story that Sri Ramakrishna used to tell about the three gunas, how they were compared to three robbers, and how it is the sattva that points the way to the truth. The sattva cannot take us to the truth directly, but it can point us the direction in which the truth lies. So that is what a purified mind can do. A purified mind, when it reaches that level of purity, it's almost indistinguishable from the self. Sri Ramakrishna said, the pure mind, pure buddhi, and pure Atman are one and the same. What is meant is that in that case of total purity, we will be able to experience the presence of the Atman deep in our deepest core of our being. The Kathopanishad calls that kind of ability as Sukshmadarshi, the ability to see Sukshma, subtle truths. And that can occur only through practicing all of these things: discernment, detachment, restraint of the mind and the senses, forbearance, these four primary disciplines that the book described. If we try to practice them as best we can, that takes away all the dross, all the impurities from the mind. And the mind becomes crystal clear, like a new mirror. And then it is able to reflect that highest reality. That's the idea. Next, there are emotions that hold us back in the covering. It takes time to process those emotions and go through the cycles of emotions and let them go. How might we direct these emotions to the true self? All of the yogas that we practice are first and foremost methods of self-purification. Jnana Yoga primarily purifies the power of reason. Even reasoning can be impure. People can use logic with some nefarious agendas. So just because something is logical doesn't necessarily mean it is the right thing or the good thing. So logic needs to be purified also. The power of reason needs to be purified also. Similarly, Bhakti Yoga is what purifies our emotions. Emotions are a great power, but if they are uncontrolled and not purified, the same emotions can take me in a completely direction I wouldn't want to go. So people who are extremely emotional and who don't have control over their emotions have to be very vigilant, because in a fit of emotion, people have done amazing things, but people have also done terrible things and afterwards regretted it. And so emotions need to be purified, and a practice of devotion helps in doing that. And once those emotions are purified, then it is easier to direct them towards God. Next, what is within is without, and what is without is within, says the Kathopanishad. How do we practice this discernment without losing our self in the world and without over-meditating? I'm not sure what over-meditating you mean by that, but what is within is without and what is without is within. By that is meant that these artificial boundaries that we create of inside and outside, those are just artificial boundaries. I mean, usually when we say, oh, this is inside me and that is outside, it's the boundary of the body really. And the body itself, as Vedanta keeps on telling us again and again, is not my true identity. The body is as much a part of this world as anything is. I mean, if you look at it at the quantum level, or the small microscopic particles level, there is really no boundary anywhere. Everything, even what this seems like an empty space, is not an empty space. These are all these small material particles. So there is really no boundary. We are like one huge ocean of material particles, this entire material universe. And depending on the concentration of certain particles and the shape and the form it takes, we say this is a human body, this is a dog, this is a chair, and this is table, and so on. And so inside and outside becomes very meaningless then. But another way to look at that is that even though I might make this distinction between inside and outside, in reality, it's all filled with the presence of God. It's all filled with consciousness. That is what Ramakrishna saw when he saw that it's just filled with the presence of the Divine Mother. So there are these two ways of looking at it. Through these physical eyes and using a little bit of our basic knowledge of science, we can see that there is really no boundaries. It's all one big ocean, almost infinite, not really infinite, but almost infinite, of material particles clustered at different densities. That's all. But through spiritual eyes, we see that everything is one, and this is truly an infinite ocean of consciousness. So there are no boundaries at all. Next, how do we remember the true nature of the self constantly while the world is constantly drawing attention towards it? Just don't pay attention to the world. It's simple. I think the answer is included in your question. That if I want to pay attention to the self, and if I really badly want it, then I won't get distracted by the world. If I'm getting distracted by the world, it means that I haven't yet fully grasped the importance of paying attention to the self. It's as simple as that. And think about it this way. If you are walking on a very narrow path or a narrow bridge, and there is a deep valley below, and the bridge is so narrow that you can only put one step at a time, and it's dark, and you are just totally dependent on the light of the moon, and it's cloudy night, and you have no option to stand. You have to cross. You are right in the middle there in the bridge. Think about it this way. At that moment, you know the importance of putting the right foot forward and putting it in the right place. One wrong step and you're gone. No one will have any problem at that stage to concentrate and not think about anything else. Nothing at that moment is important other than putting the right foot forward. But we haven't convinced ourselves yet that thinking of God or thinking of the Atman is equally important, because our present experience seems to show, well, even if I don't meditate for a few days, the world life still goes on. Even if I don't think of the Atman, I'm still fine. I can still enjoy my lunch and dinner and breakfast and go for parties. Nothing seems so terrible happening. And therefore, the mind gets distracted. So we need to find a way. That's where looking deeply comes in. If I look deeply, then I can see that even my present situation is not at all different from that imaginary situation I had put before you about finding ourselves on a narrow bridge. Because any of us can die any moment. We wouldn't want to die so soon, but one cannot deny the possibility that every moment of our life can be the last moment of my life. If I remember that, then none of us can say, I have a lot of time ahead of me. None of us has enough time. So just becoming aware of that will help. Next, though self cannot be perceived, can we perceive pointers to the self? For example, photo of a holy person or some symbol. Absolutely. Which is precisely why we need something more tangible. That's why last Sunday in the satsang we spoke about the Ishta, about a chosen ideal, that we are pursuing a goal, an ideal, which is so beyond the reach of the senses and the mind that it's easy to feel lost. It's easy to kind of feel inspired by the ideal, but also feel hopeless because it's like, it's completely beyond my reach. So can I now have some way, something I can at least grasp in some form, which is where then the lives of these enlightened beings, those whom we worship and adore today as incarnations, as prophets, as saintly figures, as the deities, the sacred deities in the different tradition. Because these are something that my eyes can see, is something that my mind can understand. And they are pointers. It's a good, you used a good term here, it's the pointers, because they do, I like to think of them also as a window, because a window is small, a window has a definite shape, but through the window, I can see a much larger area beyond. So these objects of our meditation are objects of our adoration, objects of our worship. They have a form, they have a story, there is so much thing that our mind can grasp and understand and appreciate. But once we go closer and look deeply at them, we suddenly see they become a window. That through them, we are able to enter this infinite reality. Their form melts into the formless. So that's all that we can. Since we cannot describe how this phenomenon occurs, how holding on to the form and ideas we get from these tangible ideals, we are able to go beyond everything. Since it cannot be described so logically, so well, we just say it's grace. We know it happens. We do not know exactly how it happens. We cannot describe exactly every step that occurs that makes this possible, but we know it happens. We know it happened because it has already happened in the lives of millions and millions of earnest truth seekers across different traditions and in different generations. It happens, it works. We may not always know the mechanism behind it, which is fine. Who cares for the mechanism? When we drive a car, how many of us are auto experts? We know how every part of the engine works. We don't know. And we don't care. As long as the car works, as long as the car will take me where it can take me, I don't need to know every intricacy of the machinery of the car. Similarly, I don't need to know really how this form will take me to the formless. All that I know is it does. And that's important. So thank you for all of your questions. They are really very good. They help us all think more deeply. They help us all look at this from many different angles. So we'll continue this study when we meet next Wednesday. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So we meet now on Sunday, which will also be streamed like this, and morning at 11 Eastern Time. And our topic on Sunday will be devotion to practice. And as long as we are restricted to only online programming, the meditation, the weekly meditation will be on hold as well. So we'll have, going forward, until we can meet in person again, we'll have 2 programs every week. Sunday morning at 11 Eastern will be satsang, and Wednesday evening 7:30 Eastern again. I keep on saying Eastern because there are many amongst you who are participating in these programs through different time zones. So we'll continue this study next Wednesday. So we'll finish with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto